Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This is Michelle Lero and Dan Borgesano joining you live from Imprivata headquarters outside of Boston, Massachusetts. We're going to jump right in. We've got a 15-minute session today on 4 steps to combat phishing attacks, and Dan's going to walk you through that. I just have 2 quick housekeeping items. First off, on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a box labeled Q&A. You can ask your questions for Dan at any time via that Q&A box, and we encourage any questions you might have. We'll take those at the end of the slides. And then finally, we are recording today's session, so if you're looking for a copy of the on-demand version, you'll receive that in your email box in about 1 business day or so. And I'm going to go ahead and turn us over to Dan.
Great. Thanks, Michelle, and thanks, everyone, for joining today to discuss some tactics for combating phishing attacks. So first, why are we talking about this topic? Well, as you're all probably well aware, healthcare is under attack. Security continues to be an issue across the industry, and hackers are targeting patient records, hospital financial data, and other sensitive information. And it's becoming a large problem. According to a study from Gemalto, 21% of all security breaches last year were in healthcare. The industry has seen the number of attacks increase by 125% in the past 5 years. And in 2015, more than 113 million patient records were affected, and that's about half the U.S. population has had their records compromised in some form in the past 12 months. And so where are these attacks coming from? Well, unfortunately, the answer is that they come from all different forms, from malicious attackers to negligent insiders. Patient information and hospital data faces a wide variety of risks. But one of the top threats is phishing and similar highly targeted attacks that use sophisticated methods to dupe your users into providing their usernames and passwords, which can then be used to access information. Stolen credentials are invaluable in accessing systems and information, and in fact, stolen credentials resulted in 50% outside attacks in healthcare last year, and in many cases, hackers were able to compromise the network in just minutes. And so why is phishing the top concern? And again, it's because it's highly effective. The Verizon 2015 Data Breach Investigations Report found that 23% of recipients of phishing attacks clicked the message, and 11% clicked on attachments, which should be enough to make you cringe if you're in charge of cybersecurity organization. These attacks also happen fast. On average, the first click of an illegitimate email or link happens just 22 seconds after a phishing campaign is launched. Fortunately, there are steps you can take to combat phishing, which we'll go through now. They include assessing the risk at your organization, some technologies you can put in place to combat these phishing attacks, and then how you can work with your users to better educate them on the threat. So the first step is to assess the risks. Figure out where you are vulnerable. You can do this by identifying the most likely forms of attack, such as key employee behaviors and other factors that create risk, and then understanding why these vulnerabilities exist at your organization by identifying the contributing factors and workflow requirements that cause clinical and administrative staff to favor risky behavior. Internal penetration testing, for example, can identify points of weakness and susceptibility to phishing, which helps you understand how hackers are executing attacks and how they can use employees' credentials to access patient records and other information. So after you assess the risk and identify where you're potentially vulnerable to phishing, you can start to build the defense. This starts with addressing the root cause of a successful phishing attack, employee passwords. So healthcare employees in particular, especially care providers, have simply too many passwords. They have to repeatedly type and click when entering their various passwords, and they have to enter their passwords far too often. For hackers, these passwords are the keys to the kingdom. They're keys to bypassing perimeter security, and they can easily be stolen through social engineering schemes that prey on unmanageable elements of human nature. So no matter how well-intentioned or intelligent employees are, they can easily be manipulated into revealing their passwords through clever phishing and other targeted attacks. So again, in healthcare, passwords are difficult to eradicate completely, even if you have a single sign-on solution, as many critical clinical applications and other workflows require a re-entry of a password. So the next step in combating phishing attacks is to really improve the lock. If you take remote access, for example, that typically requires a username and password to authenticate. This is a point of vulnerability for organizations, Attackers who obtain employee credentials can use them to access the network and exploit PHI and other sensitive information. So a way around this is to implement two-factor authentication for remote access and other networks. Requiring a token, for example, in addition to a username and password, helps thwart unauthorized attempts to access an organization's network with fraudulently obtained credentials. In fact, studies have shown that strong authentication could have helped prevent about 65% of cyber attacks. But in healthcare, there are unique challenges with deploying multi-factor authentication, both to care providers as well as IT. Some of these challenges include workflow efficiency for users. Adding layers of security introduces the potential to create inefficiency and disrupt workflow. So clinicians need fast, efficient authentication to remain focused on patient care. Another consideration is the solution extensible to meet all of your strong authentication requirements? So today we're talking about phishing attacks and how you can address those, but if you're implementing two-factor authentication as a defense, it's worthwhile to consider all the other workflows where you may be adding two-factor authentication now and in the future. And finally, does the solution comply with the higher standards regulating care? So there are many regulations facing healthcare, many of which involve strong and two-factor user authentication. For example, electronic prescribing of controlled substances, or EPCS, requires physicians to use two-factor authentication when prescribing. But the DEA requirements are fairly stringent. So selecting one authentication method for remote access to address phishing may not be DEA compliant, which means when you implement EPCS, you'll need to identify, purchase, manage, and give users another authentication option to meet EPCS requirements. So after you've improved the lock by adding two-factor authentication for remote network access and other workflows, and once you eradicate or at least significantly reduce the password requirements, you can educate your users. Employees can be told that they should never need to enter their username and password for an on-premise application, as IT has already enabled the necessary applications and workflows with fast automated authentication through a single sign-on solution. Users will then know if they're prompted for their password, something is wrong, and they'll be able to easily red flag the issue for IT. In many cases, the system can be configured so that the employees will not even be able to manually enter their password, even if they wanted to, because they don't actually know their password strings. So by taking these steps, organizations can address the threat of phishing, spear phishing, whaling, and other highly targeted attacks that are becoming increasingly pervasive in healthcare. With the right combination of policy, processes, technology, and user education, you can protect against security risk associated with the inherent password problem in healthcare. And Imprivata offers a comprehensive authentication and access management platform to help you do this. You can set authentication and access management policies for all your enterprise users and workflows from a single centralized platform. And standardizing on a single solution will reduce the total cost of ownership, but it will also streamline auditing and reporting so you have good visibility into exactly who is doing what with what information and when. A single solution also allows you to eliminate the need to manage or to give users multiple different authentication methods from different vendors for the various workflows. So it really makes that authentication process seamless for your users. And we give a wide variety of flexible authentication options so that your users can use whichever methods are best suited to their various workflow requirements and workflow scenarios. And many of our authentication options and our platform as a whole meet DEA requirement for EPCS compliance regulations so that it does meet the specific unique needs of healthcare. So with that, we'll now open it up to questions, which again, please enter into the Q&A panel, and we'll take your questions as they come in. So we have a question coming in about, recommendations for a user who's off-site accessing the network or other applications remotely off-site, and they don't remember their password. So you have a couple of different options. You can potentially take away the password altogether and instead use a different form of authentication or two-factor authentication. For example, a token, either delivered as a soft token on a phone, a hardware token on a fob, or Imprivata, for example, now offers a push token where a notification will be sent directly to a user's mobile phone. They simply swipe, press accept, and they're allowed in. Certainly, there are other options for certain. For certain workflows. For example, SMS. You can have a code sent to a user via SMS, and that can be a one-time code used to access whatever application they need to. Keep in mind, though, that SMS is not a DEA-compliant method of authentication for ePCS, so that can't be used for that workflow. There are also ways you can do calling into the help desk and verbally assigning that user a one-time passcode based on a series of additional information. So generally speaking, when you're looking into authentication options, you should really consider one that has these different flexible combinations and backup authentication methods for that and other scenarios.
We had another question regarding the recording of today's session, and yes, everybody who's registered, you're going to just check your email box. You're going to receive a link to the recording, and you can feel free to forward that on to other people as well. It'll be available in about a day or so, so be on the lookout in your email box for the link to the recording. I also wanted to let everyone know, I'm posting this in the chat box now, on the Imprivata website, we actually hosted a number of different webinars around security, phishing attacks. We've actually got one of our customers, Yale New Haven Hospital in Connecticut, did a very extended webinar where he really detailed out a program that he put in place internally. I forget what you called it, Dan, to sort of test the employees to see whether or not they would be susceptible to a phishing attack, and then they were able to use the results of that to do some better education of the physicians, the nurses, et cetera. So I will be posting that in the chat box on the right-hand side here. We've got a number of white papers, webinars, case studies, et cetera, that cover this topic in a lot more detail. All right, well, I think that is it, Dan. I don't see any more questions on the right-hand side of the screen, so I want to thank our audience. We promised you we'd get you in and out in 15 minutes, and I think we've accomplished that. So again, thank you for your time today, and if you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out, and we'd be happy to speak with you after the webinar.